Good morning.
Good morning.
Who was at the youth presentation in West Akron? Anybody? Josiah, you were there. Pete, you were there. Wesley, were you there? No. Anybody else? Okay. So what we're gonna do is it's almost gonna be a continuation of last year a little bit. So we're gonna have a review from last year of what was discussed and what kind of was presented, and we're gonna push that forward again for this year. But we're gonna get into a little bit of different avenue. So what we did last year is we talked about Generation Z, who they are, the age bracket, what they kind of are involved with, what their spiritual outlook is on life, that kind of thing. This is extremely important for a church, so much so that we need to put our focus here, and if not, the influences of society will take them away. We've seen this with the millennials, which is the previous generation, and we're going to see this again with this up-and-coming generation. Let's just have a quick prayer before we start. Father in heaven, thank you so much, dear Lord, that we're gathered here. We're excited to be here, Lord, and we want to specifically pray in this small group that we'd be able to look at our youth, realizing the denomination at large of how important it is to plan accordingly and to mentor and disciple our youth that continue to live in a more and more sinful world. And we pray that we'd learn something from this, Lord, that your Holy Spirit would convict us and speak to us in these few minutes that we have here together. In Jesus' name, amen. So our youth groups at our churches, how large are they? So let's just talk about our youth in general and go ahead and share. I know in Windsor we have approximately, I guess a youth group. Our choir was up for Easter special numbers, the youth group choir, and it was at like 22, I think it was. So kind of smaller, but 20 to 30. I would say probably 20 to 30 is probably accurate. I don't know. What about anybody else? Josiah, what about you in West Akron? Or sorry, in West Road?
We're about 10 to 15, depends who shows up.
Okay, 10 to 15. Anybody else?
6.
6, okay. Wesley, what do you guys got in Norton?
We combine with Worcester
Okay.
group, and it's about 35.
35.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Nice. John, you know how many are here? Don't know. There's probably,
About
Laura?
15, I would say.
15 to 20?
Actual youth,
Okay,
yeah.
so maybe 15 to 20. And again, when we're talking youth, people that go to these youth events, maybe Norton and West Akron, or sorry, Norton and Worcester, what's the age bracket? 13 to...
Yeah, it's pretty big. It's 13 to like 25.
13 to 25. Okay, and you still get 25-year-olds that come out and everything. That's awesome. That's really good to hear. The reason why I say that is because I've noticed, even in the ICFG a little bit, once you start hitting college, it's like everyone just drops off. Which before, I know talking to my mom, talking to other, I would say older people than I am, youth group was, you were married and you were at youth group. It was very different back 30, 40 years ago. So it's interesting, the dynamic has changed a bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through a little bit of a review first. And I just wanted to get that out there just to see what we're considering our youth to be. But again, we're going to go through our review from last year a little bit. 1 Timothy 4, let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of the believers in word and conversation, in charity, in spirit, and faith, and purity. Obviously, Apostle Paul speaking to Timothy there. So the agenda for the day is we're going to do, like I said, a little bit of review from last year. Then once we get into the review, we're going to look at the real concern and what that real concern is, specifically relating to the topic and the title. Generation Z characteristics. We're then going to get into the characteristics of this age demographic. We're going to talk about their character, not their spiritual outlook, but their character. What motivates them, what kind of attributes they have, and we're gonna look at that, and we're gonna see, obviously, how we can exercise or understand their characteristics. That's going to be the next part, and then we're going to look at spiritual succession planning. We look at succession planning in our families, when we look at our children, how we're going to raise our children to be fathers and mothers, just like we are fathers and mothers. We look at succession planning in our workplace and everywhere else, but yet for some reason when it comes to church, a lot of times it just kind of dies out and we forget about it. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Review. So beginning stages. I don't know if anybody remembers that picture from last year, but it was kind of a little bit of a chuckle. It's the first generation that has been born with smartphones, which is crazy to think. The generation is born between 1999, some would say millennium, like 2000 and 2015. Oldest being approximately 18 to 19 years old. And again, this isn't set in stone. These are the mile markers. This is rough, just to get an idea of the age bracket of these people. They're also known as the I generation or digital natives. We know, I shared this last year, my son, he was, 2 at the time, and he was on his YouTube, Paw Patrol, whatever he was watching, and somehow he knew that when the red thing came, he touched the screen, and when the red thing came to near the end, he would already click on a related video so that it looked like it never stopped. And then it just kind of kept going. And then another video went, and he would click on another one, and he's like, it's not done. I said, you watched like 3 videos, man. Like, come on. And he, 2 years old, and he knew how to do that. That's crazy. So they're digital native. They were born with this. It's very interesting to see how they work. Second largest generation this year, largest being, I believe right now it's the millennials. The baby boomers are starting to die out a little bit. So 69 million in the USA, so approximately 70 million people are in this generation. Worldwide, so again, this sits at, what's United States population, 330 million?
350.
350, something like that. So if we look at the percentage, 20-ish, maybe percent around there, and we can see 2.52 billion worldwide in this generation. 2, 4, 6, 20 some percent. So we can see we're between 20 to 27%, roughly, of worldwide population, right? So it's very interesting to see that. Very large population, a lot of people here. The smartphone was invented before most of this generation was born. Okay, so these are just some things that we can pick out about this generation, because the idea is not to we have to see everything. We're not just looking at them, but we're looking at everything. Society, what's influenced them, and all these things, right? Let's keep going here. The other part that we kind of reviewed last year, you're going to notice a lot of graphs, a lot of infographics, a lot of statistics are from Barna Research. Some is from Pew Research. I forget, there's a couple others, and I do definitely want to make note of that because I use them quite frequently, and I think rightfully so. 34% have no religious affiliation, so a third of them don't believe in anything. And if you think about this, you look at the millennialists, you look at those who are a little older, 30 to approximately 40 years of age, we can see that their parents maybe went to church on Easter, Christmas, here and there, you know what I mean, a couple times a year. And then what did they do? Well, they never went. So then what did they teach their kids? Well, then their kids never went. They didn't even know who Jesus is. So here's an example. I was at a lumberyard the other week, and I saw this young guy. He was 18 years old, and obviously, being the ICFG chairman, I'm really involved with youth. I just have a desire to see them grow and know the Lord. And I'm just like, hey man, how old are you? He's like, 18. I'm like, okay, cool. How long are you working here? About a month. I said, okay. I said, crazy question. Do you guys ever sit around whenever you're just hanging out with your buddies and just talk about spiritual things like God? Is there a God? What are some other religions and all this kind of stuff? And he's like, yeah, actually we do. Once in a while, we're open to it. And then I'm like, okay, my next question, what do you know about Jesus? And he's like, he was a good man. That's it. Not even savior of the world. He died on a cross. Nothing. Blank slate. He didn't know anything. And yet he had somewhat of an interest. I said, okay, my third question. Do you believe of the impossibility that something came from nothing? He's like, no way. He's like, I don't believe that for a second. He's like, there's got to be something out there. I mean, look at this. He's like, it's crazy. Look at morality and everything else. I said, okay. So then we start getting into morality. We start getting into the historicity, the validity of the Bible, and all this stuff. And I was able to share the gospel in the middle of the forklifts driving by in the lumberyard and who knows what. The guy's never heard of Jesus before. This generation, it's not that they're repelling or opposing this. They don't even know. They have no idea. They don't know. So, 34% of them have no religious affiliation. 37% would say that it's not for sure they know if God is real. They have no idea. And that could be due to ignorance. Don't know. 13% identify as atheist, as opposed to 6% for millennials. And that could be an improper definition of atheist. They might think that, yeah, well, there's something out there, but I don't believe in God. And they don't even know how to define that. Don't know. These are just some statistics, right? 49% claims that the church rejects science. So what we're going to notice now is there's this huge influence of the Greek way of thinking, as Brother Ron Bauman from Mansfield had a sermon on that several months ago. about the unbiblical worldview, how it has crept into the churches, and the churches haven't been prepared, and they're not teaching their kids, so then when their kids go off to college, they're just like, forget this, why would I go to a church, this place that doesn't believe in science? And they leave, and they don't stay. 34% believe that lying is morally wrong. A third of them. Only a third. This is staggering. That's crazy. Let's go through a few more statistics. Again, from Barna Research, we talked about last year, church is not relevant to me personally. So we just look at all Generation Z's, Christians, it's kind of give us a little bit non-Christians, right? So church is not relevant to me personally. This is huge. Generation Z, 60% of them. I find God elsewhere. Not so much as Christians in general, but Generation Z's believe that half of them that they find God elsewhere, which means that they don't find Him at church. Okay, interesting, fair enough. I can teach myself what I need to know. So this, like across the globe of Christians of all ages, Generation Z is 28%, and the list goes on. Church is out of date. I don't like the people who are at church. That's pretty standard, it seems to be across the board. And then U.S. Religious identity, and we can see for the Generation Zs, 42% of them are Christian non-Catholic. Catholicism seems to be around 8% through the millennials, Generation X, and boomers, and elders, and so on and so forth. So that's pretty standard across the board. So that's Generation Z kind of in a nutshell, really, really quick, some of their spiritual statistics that they have and who they are and how they act. I wanted to get into our church, our denomination, so the Apostolic Christian Church, and where, because obviously, Apostolic Christian Foundation, that's what this is about. We're looking at our own church. So I got into this a little bit. There's very limited amount of statistical research that we have, but there's a few brothers from Kitchener that got with, I think, some from maybe Weston Road, and they were able to have a couple surveys at camps, and they were able to get some information. And we can see that from the 1980s, they have kept documenting, I guess, amount of people, the amount of membership or attendance, and this is based off of attendance, and we can see that there obviously is a decline. So what I did is I took from 1999 to approximately 2011, 12, 13-ish, the amount of youth of that time frame, and we can see the 900 and the 700 depending on the conferences, and the current approximate decline for this entire time is about 22%. And again, this is very minimal, so just take this for a grain of salt. I'm just trying to gather what we can from the information that we have. And there's no hidden agenda with this. This is what it is, and we need to see what we can do about it. So we can see that through, I guess, these years, there's about a 20% decline. For instance, where we are, even the Eastern Conference, we were at roughly 1,000, and now we're at about 800. And it's actually 2019, it's going less than that. So we can see there's like a 30% decline just in youth alone, which is very concerning. And that was again from last year. The pursuit. So last year we ended with the pursuit of what we're going to do. And I want to read this to try to see where we're at today. And even with those who were there last year, where maybe have we come from? How have we tried to mentor, disciple the youth from that time? Titus 2, 1-8. But speak thou the things which become sound doctrine, that the aged men, the old men, be sober, one-minded, grave, temperate, strong-willed, sound in faith, in charity, in patience, that the aged women likewise, that they be in behavior as becometh holiness, not false accusers, not given to much wine, teachers of good things, that they may teach the young women to be sober, to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, keepers at home, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God be not blasphemed. Young men, likewise exhort to be sober-minded, in all things showing thyself a pattern of good works, in doctrine showing incorruptness, gravity, sincerity, sound speech that cannot be condemned, that he that is of the contrary part may be ashamed, having no evil thing to say of you. And I took that, and what I did is I kind of broke it down into 4 different parts of how we can help the younger generation in our church. And what I did is I looked at who they were, and I noticed from Scripture, inclusion. They want to be included. They want to feel that they're a part of something. And if we look at this, we can see the discipleship of the older to the younger, they're included. They feel that they're a part of an organization or a community, and that's huge. You look at the book of in Acts, or we look at different leaders, if you want to call them that. There is this discipleship, this mentorship. They're being included. They want to be heard. Okay, that's one thing. Challenge. We can see challenge in here. The aged men tell the young men, show them how to act, hold them accountable, challenge them. An ear to hear. Listen to them. What are they saying? If they want to be included, we got to now not just say that they're going to be included, but we got to listen to them. We got to see what they're all about, and we need to respect them for that. And fourthly, show them an example. And naturally, we see that Paul's letter to Titus. This example. So that was the pursuit. In the 1940s, 48 Brothers meeting. Now it's 71 years ago. Last year it was 70 years ago. But I wrote this, I took this quotation out of the Brothers meeting, and I threw this in here because I think this is extremely beneficial for us. So Joe Pfeiffer also mentioned this in his thesis, Between Remnant and Renewal. If you haven't read it, go read it. It's amazing. It's very good. He wrote that I think it was 08. So it's like 10 or 11 years old, I think, for his thesis. S.J. Braun, one of the very first late elder brother of our denomination. Now, in the old country, we find that Brother Henchy, another one, Brother, probably saying this wrong, Geipel, went up and down the land. They spoke from the very beginning to the people in the language in which those people lied, or laid, not lied as in truth and lies. And they spoke out of the bosom of their own countrymen. We owe this country also such thoroughness, such sympathy, and for that reason, more forbearance to the youth and the young generation of our land, because they are the ones who carry the citizenship and the heartfelt love of the ideals that are inborn different in every country. But in order to approach and do the fishing, not the way we think, as in the older generation, but the way that they think. And that is what fishing is, to go where the fish are, to catch them with the right kind of bait. And this is just a little bit of a quotation from that. They, maybe you might know, brother, a little bit more. They talked about this like in depth. There was pages about fishing where the fish are and not having the fish come to them. And this is so interesting because this was 71 years ago, and we're fighting with the same stuff today. How to retain the youth, how to reach them, how to get to them. And it's like, we discussed this like 71 years ago. So it's timeless, and it's something that must be treated and must be dealt with. We have to. So that was the review. That was a review of last year. So, this year, the real concern. So, I know the topic was, how are we going to use the youth in the church now and all that kind of stuff. Well, I was thinking about this a little bit, and I hope this makes sense to everybody here, and I'm going to try to portray my thoughts as best as I can. The presentation title was, How Can Generation Z, or the young generation, between 3 and 18, be about God's work in the ACC? So we throw that right at the end. We say, how can this generation be about God's work in the ACC? And how can they be used here? But the concern is, how can this denomination use the young people to be about God's work? That's totally different. And I'm going to give an example here. If we think about our workplace, if we're going to look at certain people and we have an organizational structure and we do certain things and we produce certain things, how can this person be about certain work at our workplace? And I guess the underlying factor is like we're stuck because the workplace isn't going to change. We're going to say, how can this person be here? Well, we have certain protocols here and we do certain things here, and are they going to fit the mold? And well, that view might not work, or this might not, well, we don't really do that, so are we going to be able to use them? I don't know. But if we think about it on the flip side, if we look at the person and we say, this person has amazing qualifications, they're in our division or line of work, they do things a little differently. Maybe we can use that. We can build our company for that. We can structure. We can use some of that into our organizational structure. This is great. Let's take them on and let's use that in our organization. It's completely different. So if we see, it's not how the young people are going to be used, how we are right now, and there's no change. There's this cookie cutter. This is how it is. It's not going to happen. They're going to leave. But we need to understand, how can we use the youth who are influenced by the culture around us to further the gospel and the kingdom of heaven? That's the concern. Because if we don't look at that, well, we'll talk about it. We're going to leave. They're going to leave. Now, reminders. This is very important. So I have 3 reminders about this. How can the ACC use this generation to be about God's work? There's 3 reminders that we have to remember all the time that are fact and that are biblical. God never changes, neither does his word, and we know this. We're not talking about changing doctrinal practices. We're not talking about changing the word. God cannot lie. His word never changes. Jesus says, thy word is truth. The word was in Jesus. 1 John 5 talks about that. The Spirit witnessed and testified of the truth in him. His word never changes. So no way do we ever contradict the gospel and the word of God, ever. That's reminder number 1. Number 2, respect is not to be lost. Does anybody have a Bible around?
Yeah.
There's one here. I don't know whose this is. I apologize. Let me see here. Romans. Anybody have one on their phone? Can you, somebody go to Titus 2? Oh, that's what we read earlier. Let me just flip. Somebody read Romans 12:10. Adam, you got that there?
Romans 12:10. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor.
Mm-hmm. So this whole loving and respect, and I know we can think of many other verses relating to that. We're not to lose respect for one another. So it's not like, oh, now you're saying you're going to bring in this younger generation. There's going to be no respect for the older. No, that's unbiblical. That's not going to happen, and that can't happen. So that's number 2. Number 3, the youth need to blossom. They are the fruit. They're the fruit. If you think of a tree that produces a fruit, and you think of the seeds and the seeds that are in there, and they drop, they fall into the ground, and obviously they produce trees and they produce fruit, and then it just keeps going. It's a cycle, right? The fruit need to blossom. We sing that song, blossoming youth, thou art hope and our fond expectation. Do we let our youth blossom? Do we let them flower to become this beautiful, beautiful flower? Do we do that? Ephesians 6:4. And ye fathers, provoke or rouse to anger, wrath, exasperate not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture or the tutorage and the training and calling attention to or exhortation of the Lord. This is what we're called to do. We're called to hold the word and to teach them. To teach them. This is critical, and we need to do this. So these are the reminders. So in saying how are we going to use this generation in the church to further the kingdom of God, we have to remember these 3 facts. God never changes, his word doesn't. Respect isn't to be lost, and they need to blossom. They are the fruit. They need to blossom. So we looked at their spiritual outlook a little bit, and this is just statistics, right? So keep that all in mind. But the characteristics now, like how do these people act? How are they influenced to act in the world that we live in? And I have 4 different characteristics of how they act. The always-on generation. So this generation between 2 and 18 years old, on average, they consume 40 plus hours a week on screens. Okay? Highest consumption is on smartphones. Obviously, that's a pretty obvious statement. The least is on laptops, which I find pretty interesting. The least is on laptops. The majority of the teens feel their use of social media is just right. It's not too much. It's not too little. Just right. We're good. The favorite website of the year in 2019 for Generation Z is YouTube. How many hours do we spend on YouTube? We have a very different... I don't know what I am a day. I don't know. Less than half an hour, I would say maybe. I don't know. Anybody else? Like, do we use YouTube a lot in here or no? Or young guys? Yeah?
Yeah.
2 hours about right?
I think that's a little high, but...
A little high, yeah. No, and that's good. That's good to know. I want to get some feedback here. So they say average, and again, this is average, right?
Yeah.
So average is 2, and yeah, that's that. So the always-on generation, they are always there 40 plus hours a week on some sort of device or screen. Always on. The second characteristic, they're an entrepreneurial generation. This blew my mind. 61% of this generation would rather be an entrepreneur than an employee when they graduate college. 61% of them. And this was, I think the statistic was taken of about, what was it, 3,000 of them, something like that. So 61% say they want to be an entrepreneur instead of working for somebody. 75% of teens want to convert their hobbies into jobs. And I have seen this so much. I'm into woodworking and blacksmithing and leathersmithing, and I just love the crafts. I love those things. And I can see so many young people. There's a guy in Toronto blacksmith. He's 19 years old. The guy is unbelievable. He's making axes and hatchets and hammers and he's holding classes. Guys that are 70 years old are going to this guy to learn blacksmithing. They have this entrepreneurialism, if that's even a word, is just in them, and they just love to do it. It's incredible. 72%. Oh, here's another one. There's a guy out in San Diego. He's like 19, I think, and he fixes leather boots, like cowboy boots and Red Wing boots, and he fixes sneakers and shoes, and he's got this YouTube channel, and people from across the states send him boots and stuff to fix, and he's fixing them and makes them look amazing. 30-year-old pair of boots, and he fixes them and brings them back to life. It's just incredible. It's amazing. So 75% of teens want to convert their hobbies into jobs. 72% of high school students want to start a business one day. So the goal is, they'd like to start a business. They want to be independent. They are independent. They want to use their skills. And it's almost like this fend for yourself kind of mentality almost. It's weird. It's different. One thing to note is the millennials, the previous generation, my generation, they were all about consumption. Consuming. I don't want to do anything. I just want to consume. I want to see what's out there. I want everything to just feed me and relax. This generation's like total flip. It's like we're individual or we are energetic, zealous people. We're entrepreneur. We want change, and we can see this. So that's number 2, entrepreneurial generation. Number 3, the change generation. So 60% of this generation want to change the world. They want to do something really, really big. Something to impact a lot of people. We can see this, and it goes back to the first characteristic. They use social media and technology to their advantage to do that, right? It's no longer about consuming, but rather creating. I mentioned that already. This could be due, and I was thinking about this. Now, this could be due to technological advancements. This could be due to social media comparison, and I'm sure this is huge, right? I fall into this. I go on whatever, you're on Instagram or Pinterest, and you're looking, it's like, that guy just made like that coffee table. I'm like, what on earth? Like, how, like, I want to do that. Like, and then it's like, well, I want to do something better than that. And we're like comparing all the time to somebody else. These people are just inundated with that in this generation. So they compare themselves with other people a lot. It might be the entertainment world influences, right? You have music. Music influences us and brainwashes us sometimes in ways that we don't even know. Movies. What movies are out there that are influencing people to do certain things or to be a certain way? Pop culture. That's huge, right? And somehow pop culture is now kind of tied in with politics. It's kind of all just intermingled together. Like it's weird. News, and I put in brackets, opinion outlets, because that's kind of what it is now. It's not really news anymore. In fact, it's opinions. And this is true, right? But it's influencing people to be a certain way, whether we like it or not. So these could all play a factor in this change generation, not sure, but over half of them want to do something big, okay? The 8-second filter generation, I had no idea how to word this, so I just said the 8-second filter generation, which doesn't really, I don't know, sound too, I don't know, whatever. So options are limitless, but time is not. And it's not that these people have attention disorders. In no way. In fact, one statistic that I read, I guess it was a research paper that I read on the Generation Zs, it says that 11% of them have ADHD. So everyone's like, oh, they're all, they all have some sort of disorder, or their attention span is terrible, and it's because of the influences. It's, yes, but it's mainly due because they have to sort through massive amounts of information. We don't want to waste time here. So they have to sort through massive amounts of information quickly because they have to keep up. Everybody's doing it. Everything is so spontaneous and quick. I notice that even with myself. When I'm looking something up, I have a price here on Amazon, a price here Best Buy, over here, bam, okay, I'm going to purchase it there, done. Within a minute, I've made a deal, and it's the best deal out there within that time frame. Like, it's crazy, and if you just sit back and think about it, that's what this generation's all about. It's quick, it's fast-paced, they gotta keep up, move. And so we need to look at this. The Generation Z, and I didn't put this in quotations, but they have a fully tuned radar, so to speak. If they're not drawn in, they're gone. They don't need to waste their time. And that's how they view life. And is it good? Is it bad? That's up for discussion. But this is just their characteristics. So we have these four, okay? And what we're going to do about these four characteristics is we're now going to look at how do we exercise them and how do we understand their characteristics more within the church setting. So we know this about them. We're not going to change this. When you consider a 3-year-old to an 18-year-old, we can influence them, but these influences from society that's around us in North America, you're not going to change that. That's just what it is, and that's how it is. And we have to use that somehow to further the gospel in the kingdom of heaven. Okay? So, if we look at these, exercising their characteristics, the always-on generation, they're always on. They always have their smartphone or whatever they're all around them. How can the church use technology to further the gospel? And I want us to think about this. Online Bible studies. I talked to the ICFG, being involved with the ICFG a lot, looking at how can we utilize online Bible studies. People, included in this, work remotely sometimes. I can be I was running a job in London and I was doing some stuff for some jobs out in Windsor. 2.5 hours away in a car. And I'm working like as if I was in Windsor. When people work remote all the time. So how can we further the gospel remotely like that? And I was thinking about, we got go-to meetings. I think Microsoft has Microsoft Teams now. Something I started using that at work a little bit. And there's these other things. Think about this. Imagine using like a go-to meeting website, hosting a Bible study for people that are out in Portland, in Windsor, in California, and you have a class of 30 people from the church. That's incredible. That's amazing. And you're utilizing technology to further the gospel. That's beautiful. Video miniseries. Everybody, YouTube, it's the #1 website of the year for Generation Zs. Utilize it. How can we use that to further the gospel? We started doing videos for ICFG. I'm walking around, I just took a 1-minute video. Hey, we're going out here, blah, blah, blah. You know how many people just click and it's like, yeah, well, that's kind of cool. Because they just want to see something. They're influenced by it. It's amazing. Use it. Online children's content. I was talking to my wife about this, and imagine, kids go to Sunday school once a week, and then after that they're playing around. If they go to school, they're out in the public setting, or if they're homeschooled, they're not. But they're interacting with other people all the time. How can we utilize technology my 3-year-old son knows how to navigate around the iPad, whether it's YouTube or his other apps that he's got and all this stuff, so much so that, if the Visa number was in there, he could purchase things. Thankfully it's not. So they know how to utilize, they know how to run it around and use it. Use it to further the gospel for these kids. That's just incredible. And there's several, different, platforms that you can use that on. There's several different publishers or creators. I know even on YouTube they have some Christian kids content, which is great. We need to start doing that. The Apostolic Christian Church of America, right? They have, AC Central? I think that's what it's called. Remember, yeah? They have an app. Awesome app. All of their sermons, they got podcasts, they got this, they got their newsletters. It's like, yeah, that's awesome. The church needs to consider a healthy avenue of remote resources, and I put this in bold because it's extremely important. Compelling those to see the benefit of physically gathering together. To be one-on-one in person is necessary for our accountability, for spiritual progress, for growth, for communion and fellowship. That is not to be excluded. In fact, this is to compel people to come to church and desire to be at church. Hey, Bible study that we were part of Monday nights? Oh yeah, we were talking about this and this and blah, blah, blah. That's awesome. And so we have to remember that. So that's, Hebrews 10, 25 and 26? Not, separating ourselves, but keeping together, being accountable one to another. So the always-on generation. This is extremely important. The church needs to utilize this. The entrepreneurial generation. The church needs to allow this generation, and I'm talking about believers in this generation, not all, some room to create. They have this desire, we mentioned, to change the world, do something big, create, be a use my talents to further something. And it should be believers, their desire to further the gospel, then allow them to further the gospel and create and do things. When it comes to small group studies, help them get a small group together and push that. And if that means that they need a mentor there, a disciple, then get on board with them and do it. Evangelizing. How many young people, I've even been told, we need to evangelize more. We're not evangelizing. Our church doesn't evangelize. Then get out there and do it. And I'm going to come along with you. I'm not going to let you do it alone. I'm going to be there for you. Mercy Ministries. I know we do this a lot. That's why I didn't put it in bold. But it's still an amazing thing. Jesus, he commands us, shelter and clothe the naked and the lost and the poor and the sick. Those are good things too. Obviously, we can't forget about sharing the gospel. Ministry and music. Our young people are so talented. Use their music to further the gospel. Not to sit, and I'm not saying this is wrong, but not to just sit in our churches and have beautiful music for us. Get out. We need to get out there. Let the music fill this place and this city and the country and the continent, whatever, the world. Let the music moves people. Let them use that and let them have that as an avenue to further the gospel and to make a difference, to feel like they're being used. Online content. Young people want to be a part of something, let them help out. Let them help out. That's so important. And again, with supervision of the older, allowing for a mentor-disciple relationship. This is so critical on every single one of these points. We need to have mentorship and discipleship. That's the Great Commission. We're called to go out, preach the gospel, teaching all of those to observe all the things that Jesus commanded us. We have to disciple and mentor. That was one of the number one things we, in the survey last year for the youth, who was it? Gary Tomick put something together at Eastern Camp, and he had, I think there was 175 respondents or whatever, and that was one thing, and he took the same questions, and he gave these questions to ministry and the ministers and their wives, and they answered it, and that was the most different or opposing answer. The young people were like, we don't have mentorship at all in the church. It was huge, 80% said that we don't have mentorship in the church. And then the ministry and their wives, no, we're about 70%. 70 or 80%. We're pretty good at mentorship and discipleship. So there's a huge disconnect there. And we need to be real with ourselves, right? We need to be real with ourselves. So that's how we can exercise their characteristics, because that's how they have been brought up and influenced in society. Now, understanding their characteristics, the change generation. If number 2 is followed, they are going to see a change taking place. They're going to see the gospel being furthered. They're going to see zealous individuals. They're going to see the young people being used. It's going to enliven them. It's going to make them feel that they're worth something, that they're a part of something, that they're sharing in this, the furtherance of the gospel. So if they see number 2, they're going to be encouraged. Encourage them to be used, but yet letting them once a request is made. So not just saying, young people, you need to do stuff. We need to go out. You got to share the gospel. You got to, and then they come up and they say, hey, I want to do this. It's like, you know what? I don't know if that's going to work in our church. It's like, hold on a second. Why is it not going to work? This needs that we need to utilize that, because if they just hit a brick wall, the 8-second generation, they're just going to leave. They're going to leave. Knowing their radar. If information provided is not solid, biblically based material that is going to be convicting from the Holy Spirit, they're going to find spiritual food elsewhere. I, in a matter of 5 seconds, can go on my phone and listen to 18 different sermons. Not from our church. Anywhere. It's that easy. It's so easy. I can, so much so that I can, and I'm sure we all know this, I can put in a specific word, a sermon with the word wine in it, and it will pull up every single sermon that has been recorded that has the word wine in it, or has the word whatever. It doesn't matter. It's that easy. And if they want it, they will find it within seconds. So, if what we have here is not solid and biblical, the truth and convicting and compelling, they're going to leave. They will leave. It's not if they're going to leave, it's when they're going to leave. Knowing their radar, they will. If they're not heard, they will go where they are heard fast. They're going to move. So if they're gonna keep asking for a request, it's not like, you know what, they'll just hold it out. The silent generation or the millennials, they're just gonna sit back and wait it out and whatever. They're gonna take off. Why would they be here if they're not being used? Knowing their radar, they're gonna do it on their own. They will do it on their own. If they're gonna go share the gospel and the church is not gonna support them, they're gonna figure it out on themselves. So it's not like, oh, well, what are we gonna do about it? It's how are we going to utilize them? We have to always keep that in our mind. We cannot blame the youth for the way they have been influenced, whether in the church or out of it. And I want to repeat that. We cannot blame the youth for the way they've been influenced, whether in the church or out of it. I'm not saying the result of that influence and that person have responsibility. I'm saying the way they've been influenced. We can't change the way that society is and how they're being influenced. It's just impossible. It's not going to happen. We question why our children are suffering so greatly from the influences of postmodern day, yet we forbid to ask the question, yet we forbid to question what the postmodern day influences have done to us. So think about this. In the church, specifically, the youth have been influenced. How has this society influenced you and me to affect, obviously, the youth, because they're going to look up to us? How much of the world have we taken on? How much of the thorns have choked up our good tree so that we can't produce good fruit in and of ourselves? And then we look at the youth and we're like, oh, look at, why are they like that? Why are we the way we are? Maybe we have to come back to us. So this is critical. And lastly, I wanted to talk about spiritual succession planning. So succession planning defined as the process for identifying and developing new leaders who can replace the old leaders when they leave, retire, or die. Developing internal people of the organization, whether that's work, and I talked about families before, churches are included, or the yacht club and everything else, they all think about this. How can they use internal people, members of a church, with the potential to fill key business or leadership or servanthood positions? How do we do that? This is done at work, at home, at other organizations, but why do we not do it at church? Why do we not look and scout out and say, you know what, this person is exhibiting some amazing prayer qualities. Let them run with it. Actually, you know what? Let's tell them, hey, we feel that you have some amazing prayer potential. You're a prayer warrior. This guy, he loves digging into the Word. You need to start Bible study groups for 3 groups by the end of the year, and I want you to pursue that. You have that gift. Move on that gift. Teaching. You have an amazing teaching skill. We want to bring that up to the mentorship. We need a new minister in the church. Can we use a brother like this? He's got the skills. So, succession planning. Is this biblical? Absolutely it is. Numbers 27, 12 to 13, Joshua 1. This is where God was charging Moses to find a successor, and he shared with him Joshua and everything like that. Amazing, beautiful scriptural references for succession planning. You're going to carry the children of Israel, being the deliverer. Yeshua is his name, Yehoshua. 1 Kings 19, God showing Elijah. Remember, he goes up into the mountain. He's like, Lord, you have nobody. There's nobody left. There's just me. I'm the only one. And then we know that he came in a still small voice, and he said, you're going to be using Elisha. You're going to go out and find him. In fact, there's 7,000 of a remnant that's going to be left. But anyways, you're going to use Elisha. So again, succession planning. There's going to be somebody coming after a successor. And naturally, Jesus choosing the 11 disciples to further the gospel. So again, succession planning. And we can see this taking place. 1 and 2 Timothy, and I want to put emphasis on 2 Timothy. You read 2 Timothy, Apostle Paul is like, you're going to be like this. Don't fall into this. Flee youthful lust. Go like this. Go. He even, what did he call him? Didn't he say, I'm like a father unto you? I believe so, in 1 Timothy. This is incredible. And this is succession planning. Somebody else that's going to come up and take the position of the older. Why? Because they're going to die and go to heaven. Like, somebody's got to keep the gospel going here. The church has got to remain. And there's many other examples. So, this, real quickly, it's not about how are we going to use them, or how's this church going to use them, it's how are we going to use them in the church, okay? And we really need to focus on that. There's different examples of succession planning in the Word. How are we doing that at our local churches? How are we doing that as a denomination as a whole? These young people have so much potential. being in the ICFG, I see these young people, they have a desire to get together, they have a desire to make a change, to be the difference, to know the Word more. They want to study the Word. They want to have deep prayerful conversations and spiritual conversations to uplift one another. They want to confess their sin one another. This is beautiful, but if we don't utilize them, they will leave, guaranteed. Look at the millennial generation in our church. Most of them are gone. There's so many people that have left, and I don't want to be the degrading, bearer of bad news or something, because I know Thad even mentioned earlier, the church has affected so many people. I agree with that. Praise the Lord for that. But how are we going to keep the denomination alive and be used for the gospel? How can the ACC use Generation Z to be about God's work? This is interesting. As the fourth generation of North American roots, and I want to go back to the 1948 Brothers meeting, the fourth generation of North American roots blossoms into the Apostolic Church, we must understand the necessity to use them as vessels for the Lord in this sinful world, yet not be of it. It's the fourth generation. My son is the fourth generation of ACC roots, so to speak, in America, in North America. Okay, we're Canada, whatever. In North America, this is huge. This is huge, and this needs to be taken into consideration, just like it was 71 years ago. And if it's not, they will leave. They will leave. Any thoughts or comments? That's kind of what I had. Anybody? Maybe what you see in your churches, or how you feel that the youth is excelling or not excelling, or...
Well, I would just say, dealing with this generation on a daily basis, that one of the flip side of a lot of the things that you did a great job of focusing on the positive. This generation, probably more than any other one, is used to having everything fine-tuned to their preferences. Mm-hmm. Because you can look at it and watch or whatever you want. Yep. Whereas, if I had a favorite show, I had to wait till Thursday at 8. But for them, they can have it right away, right now. Yeah. The only way to really mitigate against that, and I think you brought it out pretty well, is the real-life relationships. The mentoring helps them understand it's not always about me. It's not always about what I want when I want it. And so that part of it has to be, I think, a functional process in using them. Mm-hmm. I think you did a great job laying out kind of what would need to happen for that. Yep. But the multi-generational aspect is the key. It's the essential part.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel that I don't know what it is, but in the church setting, we lack that so much. We don't have discipleship. We don't have mentorship. I know even in the local church I attend, we had one meeting where somebody was so passionate to have this mentorship program and to get the young men together, and we had one meeting and just died, stopped.
10 minutes.
Oh yeah, we're just wrapping up now. Wolf, go ahead.
Just one thought. All analogies break down, but just because I have some in my own brain, I use analogies a lot.
Yeah.
I would suggest that the young people are not the fruit, but they are the extension of the branch which bears the fruit. And the older
I see where you're coming from.
The older generation has borne fruit, but they need to transmit that into the next generation so that they can bear it, because the stump no longer bears fruit. It is the new branches.
No, that's fair. That's good. Yeah.
I kind of come from the outside, so because a lot of people in the church are children of.
Yeah.
So I come from the outside. Was it more of a tradition in the earlier church for families to be the mentors, in a sense, like parents mentoring their children?
Yeah, and I think that's biblical.
Yeah.
That's biblical, right from Deuteronomy, when God spoke to Moses. He's like, you're supposed to teach your kids on a daily basis. You're responsible for your family. So yes, I would say so. And even in previous brothers meetings, like international brothers meetings minutes, the 48 brothers meeting was. The minutes they took were just outstanding, and it was amazing to see what they dealt with, and also their pursuit. And their pursuit was the young people, and they were really called to action to move on that. And I think that for a lot of years, although we kind of said we were doing that and pursuing it, it's just been put on the back burner. It takes a lot of work. Yeah.
I think an effective way to get the Gen Z to, going out doing God's work, if you would, would be going alongside them as a millennial generation,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
Especially as parents. You know, like I was kind of brought up in a generation where, you know, your service to God was to go to church. You drop your kids at Sunday school, you pick them up, and you live your weekly life.
Yeah.
And that's about it, you know. And I'm not trying to, you know, put anyone down or anything, but like a lot of the parents were coming from Europe, you know, and trying to build a living. They got busy, right? And there was no real like relationship with the fostering of like, you know, going out and like serving the community or serving, you know, foster kids or whatever it may be, right? It was, you know, church was Sunday, your duty. You're a good person if you do that, and you're gonna, you know, hopefully make it to heaven by the skin of your teeth, right? And I think as millennials, you know, our generation is kind of figuring out like, well, we need more. We want more, right? We want a relationship with God, but we also want a relationship with each other and our parents. And like, how can we emulate that into the next generation? Right? Like keeping relationships, you know, on the forefront, right? Because like God is a God of relationships, and if we don't have that relationship, you know, in between those generational gaps, you know, we're going to lose a generation, whether it be
There's no connection.
There's no connection.
Absolutely,
Exactly.
absolutely. Yeah, like I was thinking about, you know, those coming over from persecution and war, and they had nothing over in Europe, like nothing, barely anything. They come over with nothing, and they worked and they toiled for their families because they loved their families, and they became successful, and God blessed them for that, and they moved on, and then their children, it was a natural tendency for them to work hard. They had a really good paying job, and so they did that, and they had a lot of money, and then they just came to church on Sundays and they worshiped. And then it kept moving into the next generation, and there's no connection to the kids because the parents worked to make money, and that's how they loved them, and that's what they knew. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that's just the trait that they held. And the more and more you go down the line, there's just no connection. The connection's lost. Absolutely. Anybody else? Some thoughts, Wesley, and then Laura?
The comment I was going to make with that is, obviously I'm not, or maybe not obvious, but I'm not a parent or anything. But from a perspective of like a kid, like obviously our parents give us like a lot of moral backbone in raising us, but the same parents that tells me the kind of man I should be is the one that's telling me to like make my bed and go unload the dishwasher. And sometimes like that stuff blurs and you just tune out your parents. And sometimes it's like, oh, this is my parents, or say whatever. And then, but when someone else kind of comes in though and comes alongside of you, like as a mentor, that's not that kind of parental.
There's a different relationship.
It's different,
Yeah.
and you listen to them and look up to them,
Yeah.
like completely different way. And like it's your parents could be telling you something for years, you're like, ah, whatever. But then like someone else says the same exact thing, you're like, wow, that is so profound.
The parents like, really?
Yeah, because I haven't told you for that years. But and I'm not saying good, bad, right, or wrong. That's just how it is. Because our parents are, ever since we were, you know, yay high or whatever, they've been telling us what to do. So we just kind of tune them out sometimes.
It's the same thing in marriage, man. I'm trying to tell you that.
Laura, go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
That's why it's really great, like, for other people coming into, like, the young people and mentoring them, because it just, not that the parents have done a bad job, but they don't have that backbone, and just can speak the same things differently into someone. That's made a profound impact on me for those.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for that, Laura.
So I think one of the times when this church is actually the most intentional about mentoring is counseling.
Yeah.
Right before baptism. I mean, that is a formalized mentor relationship.
Yeah.
But I've found once you get baptized, it kind of stops.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, this is a generation that has so much passion. And right when you're baptized, I would say that's when your passion is probably at its highest.
Yeah.
But it's also when you're potentially the most vulnerable because you're young and Satan knows that. So if we could start kind of a mentorship at that point, that would be, I think, so beautiful for both sides.
Yeah. Now, and actually, I was going to bring that up. I don't know, how does everybody think, like, or feel about that? Because, like I shared with an example in the local church that I attend, it's almost like we formalized it so much where it's like, okay, now I'm going to put my mentor hat on. It's like, hey, young one, I'm your mentor, you know, and it's just like, the guy's like, I don't want to, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, that's really weird. Like, we just, and it's like, okay, mentor so-and-so, mentor so-and-so, and then like this person, it's like, what if we just together, like worked and gelled with each other, and the older and the younger, and just we had the godly love for one another that you don't want to see the young people, but like Titus, right? The Titus 2 that we read, like that should just naturally come as Christians, as believers in Jesus Christ, because we know the benefit that it brings and the fruit that it's going to produce. Like, I don't know, is that wrong of me to think that? Should we have something more formal? Yeah.
What we've done here recently, maybe this was before Laura's time, is that I think the ministers have been counseling the converts to find a mentor.
Yeah,
So
okay.
find somebody that they would like to talk to about things, and it's been really successful
That's
with
good.
our recent converts. And I think there has to be some fluidity to it. Like
Yeah.
one girl found somebody and they have kind of formal meetings, and then another girl didn't want to pick necessarily one mentor. She wanted to be mentored by several women in her life that she looks up to. And so I think you're right when we say you are now mentoring so and so. It does not go well.
No.
But if the young person finds somebody that they respect and that they would like to forge a relationship with, it can be either one person or
Right.
several.
Yeah. No, I think that's really good. And I guess with that, not to try to digest this to it like extremely well, but when we consider this whole mentorship thing, there needs to be a love for one another. There needs to be the ability to share experiences and to confess sin. If we're separated from one another and there's this disconnect there, like even with peer-to-peer relationships or like in the church and the membership of the church, like how is mentorship supposed to take place? Like that just won't happen. You know? Yeah.
I think like a lot of this requires a lot of sacrifice that I think we're just not willing to take, and I think that's what it kind of comes down to. Whether you're talking about like taking the time to mentor someone or get to know someone in the younger generation, it's like, well, I kind of just want to hang out with my peers. I think that's the older, like each generation kind of segregates themselves.
Yeah.
And I've seen this to the extent to where like I know of several churches that like not AC churches that have like a contemporary service that have like praise and worship music and dimmed lights and that kind of service, and then at the same time in a different room in the church they have like a traditional service with the pews and the hymns and the older pastor who's more of that style. And so it's to the point where it's like we want our preference so much, like we want what we want out of church. So it's like we're getting our preference, and I think it's our responsibility as the older, more mature Christians to die to ourselves and say, it's not about what I want, it's not about who I want to talk to at church, it's about who I can give to at church. It's not about like what particular style I want, but what style is going to help my church grow and what's going to bring people in.
Right.
And I think that like dying to self mentality needs to be cultivated first.
Okay, that's really interesting, and I think that goes along with those points, dying to self, or like, I guess, how do you... Dying to self, I guess, is a good way to put it, and sacrifice almost for even the style of worship, yet really being cognizant of those three reminders. God's word never changes, there must be respect, and the young people need to flourish and blossom because they are going to be the church coming up. And we have to always be mindful of those three things. Anybody else? That's a very good point, though. Yeah.
Kind of to go along with Peter's point, I think it's helpful too when in our relationships with other people in the church, like serving them. Like Generation Z to me isn't stupid. Like they're very smart.
Oh yeah.
Right, and they see, right, and they can see if you're genuine, and if you're like serving with a genuine heart, right. And if they don't see that, like it can be discouraging for a lot of young people to see kind of like that. Oh, like this person wants to mentor me, but like they do it because they see a need, but like they're so busy with their life, right? And like maybe we only get to meet like once a month or something.
Yeah.
Right. So I think, like Peter says, sacrificing and then serving, right?
Yeah.
I was talking to this guy in my networking group, and he does like this talk for our business. How we go out and do business, and he brought like 2 spoons, right? He brought a bigger spoon and a smaller spoon, and he asked the whole group, he's like, which spoon do you guys use more? Right, and the point he was trying to make was if you use the bigger spoon more, like what you put in is what you're going to get out, right? But if you're always looking to get served, constantly trying to serve yourself in life, you're not gonna get the same benefit out of it as serving, right? So I think we have to develop that heart and mindset, of a servant first.
Yes, absolutely. I think we need to wrap up here. Thank the Lord and all of you for your participation. I hope it was well received. Great, good stuff.
Thank you.
Oh, thank the Lord, yep.